to the Now Morning Show. Tobago Thursdays continues, but it's Tobago Thursdays with a twist because we have in studio with us, can you believe it, Dr. Paul Crooks, media liaison for the TNT Veterinary Association. And this morning we're speaking about animal welfare and the 5 animal freedoms. I have to say it again. Welcome to the studio.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. We've been having so many conversations on Zoom, so to now have you here in person, we know this conversation is going to run incredibly smoothly, but we need to start with the basics first when it comes to animal welfare and the 5 animal freedoms. Can you just define those for us, first of all?
All right. So basically, the concept that we want people to understand ultimately is that most domestic animals are considered sentient. And sentience means awareness. And even now, up to maybe within the last 3 or 4 years, there's been research that animals we previously classified as not being sentient appear to show sentience. So, for example, lobsters are prepared by being boiled from being taken as live animals. Mm-hmm. And research has shown that these animals are very aware of what's happening to them and very much would appreciate not being treated like that. Mm-hmm. So initially, even the thought we had of animals with spines, dogs, cats, domestic animals, cattle, sheep, farm animals, that they have to be treated with a certain level of care and kindness. We are extending that beyond that point. Now, the question is for the layman, how do you know that you're treating this animal that the way the animal should be treated? And ultimately, that's what the 5 freedoms were about. Mm-hmm. It really was based on the treatment of farm animals initially, many, many, many years ago. And it has since expanded into general guidelines for the care of all animals. Here in Trinidad and Tobago, we don't only have farm animals, we have pet animals, and of course we have people who have non-domestic animals, wild animals, in their care. And the 5 animal freedoms apply across the board.
So can you walk us through what the 5 animal freedoms are?
Absolutely. So the first and most basic one I would say that people would understand simply is freedom from hunger and thirst. So basically every animal should get appropriate nutritious food and access to ad libitum water, which means they should have access to water all the time. Whenever an animal wants to drink water, that water should be available for that animal. And then we have freedom from discomfort. So basically, the idea there is to present an environment for an animal that is relatively free of stress. So the animal is kept at a comfortable temperature for that species. The animal is provided with housing that mimics the normal housing of the animal in the wild, if it is a wild animal. So when you go to the zoo, you know that the housing for the giraffe is not necessarily the same as the housing for the chimpanzee, and so on. Even like birds, we recommend that they have large enough cages that they can fly. And I'll go on to another animal freedom that we're going to talk about. But so we have freedom from hunger and thirst and freedom from discomfort. Then we have freedom from distress. So with freedom from distress, you want to ensure that an animal is not exposed to extremely stressful triggers. So let's say you have rabbits. You don't want to keep your pet boa constrictor next to your rabbits. Right. Because just having the snake nearby, even if the snake doesn't have access to the rabbits, is enough to scare the rabbit. There are animals that are very sensitive to loud noises. As we know, dogs, in particular, we talk about fireworks for New Year's Day, Diwali, and so on, that dogs panic and often can run many miles away from their owner's home because of loud noises. So it is our duty as owners of animals to ensure that we limit the stress that they are exposed to. There's freedom from injury, disease, and distress. And in that case, injury and disease, if the animal experiences a cut, we've had cases where owners would tell us, oh, I just used some black disinfect on the cut. Or we've had cases where animals have maggot wounds and they spray with Baygon. And many times we have to tell our owners, would you use that on yourself? Or if your child had this cut, would you use black disinfectant on your child? And if the answer is no, then why are you doing it to the dog or the cat or the sheep that you own? And so with freedom from injury and disease, our recommendation is, one, of course, not everything is preventable, but where something occurs, you take an animal to a vet as soon as possible. The longer that you wait in delaying the care of this animal by a veterinarian, the more likely that this is going to have a very negative outcome. And of course, animals can suffer from all sorts of diseases, including cancer, diabetes, and so on. And so those should be diagnosed as early as possible to be well managed. And finally, the last animal freedom is freedom to express normal behavior. Now, when I'm talking to owners about this, I always say that we must add something to that, which is within reason. So we have cats, and depending on who you talk to, if you talk to an environmentalist, they might say a stray cat is actually an invasive species. And we know that stray cats destroy or decimate lizard populations, bird populations across the globe, but especially here in Trinidad and Tobago, where we have such a booming stray cat population, the Carney Bird Sanctuary. There are places in Tobago, in Speyside, and so on, where the cat population is out of control, and as a result, our wild animal species are decreasing. The population is decreasing. That's one of the reasons we recommend spaying and neutering. And if we go further, people would argue, and I've encountered many clients who've said, well, it's natural for the dog and the cat to have kittens and puppies. Sometimes they have no plan for how they would get rid of these puppies and kittens if they breed them. Many times it's just so-called pot-hound or the domestic short-hair cat, which is your normal cat. And they just want them to have kittens and want them to have puppies, even though they have the means to spay and neuter these animals. They want them to have it because it's a natural process, they would say. And that's why I would say, with that particular freedom, within reason, because we want to be able to restrict animals' reproduction for the greater good, if necessary. We also want to ensure that cats are not destroying the wildlife so that they are housed appropriately. So yes, cats want to hunt, but is that right? On the other side, birds, you don't want your parrot that you've acquired legally by going to the game wardens and getting approval. You don't want that parrot is kept in a cage that is vertical rather than horizontal, because that vertical cage looks nice in the corner of your house. Because that parrot cannot fly. And that parrot needs to fly for that parrot to feel fulfilled.
You know, Dr. Crooks, from everything you've said here, two things are really sticking out to me right now. First of all would be, there's clearly a gap when it comes to awareness and education and even advocacy. So we do have to touch on that. But before we get to that, let's talk about how far these freedoms are actually recognized and respected on our region, but specifically here in Trinidad and Tobago. In your opinion, are they respected?
Unfortunately, no, because still in Trinidad and Tobago and across the region, really, because many of the issues we see here are regional. I am also part of the Caribbean Vet Medical Association, for example, and we know that complaints like what I've described, where people use black disinfectant and they spray with Baygon and so on, are actually very commonplace. This is very common behavior. Across the region, we want to raise the regard for care for animals and of the veterinary profession. So that's part of the reason why we at the Vet Association have established the media liaison post, and to try to keep a constant communication with members of the public and increase their awareness and the care, compassion for animals. Overall, we see that there's a lack of consideration, a lack of compassion in humans. We've seen that. So imagine where you're raised to think that you should throw stones at pigeons or throw stones at stray dogs. Then you're learning generationally that this is okay. It's okay to treat animals this badly. And now we at my level and all the younger generations of vets and so on growing up, as well as hopefully children through school and so on, being trained to treat animals and people hopefully in a different way.
Yeah.
But have we been seeing that borne out in the way that animals are treated over the years? And generally I would say no. Even farm animals are still treated with scant courtesy, and there's still inhumane slaughtering and so on. So advocacy is very, very important, and that's why groups like the Trinidad and Tobago Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, the Animal Welfare Network, and the work that they do is very, very important.
Yeah. So there's a lot to cover in this conversation, clearly, but I think there are two other things now that really come to the forefront of the mind, which would be public education as to whether or not we do have it and what your recommendations would be for that, and any possible legislative changes, because what you're referencing, for example, with the pigeons is something that generationally, culturally takes place. So it's a lot of unlearning. So what do you think about that approach?
Well, legislation, we've been advocating for legislative change for years at the Vet Association. But one of the major issues we've encountered is that the legislation may exist. Yes, it could be very archaic legislation, but what we have issues with is enforcement of the legislation regardless. So we've had police officers that we've spoken to in times past with different cases, and I work very closely with Venus Doggess of Love, an NGO in Tobago, to try to investigate and address cruelty cases that we see, where we know for sure there are cruelty cases, where we know for sure this animal had a broken limb and the animal was left with that broken limb where the bone is sticking out for days, weeks, the owners are unresponsive, and the animal eventually dies in a lot in Bonaccord in Tobago, for example. We have documentary evidence and so on. And when you go to the police would say, well, as the owner's animal, they can do what they like. And then it goes further. If the owner says, well, yes, I went to a vet, and there's necessarily no way to prove that he went to a vet, or where he might have been misinformed, because we spoke about fraudulent practitioners before, and might have gone to a fraudulent practitioner. And in that case, is it his fault if that's what he did and the fraudulent practitioner made a mistake? Even then, now, did this fraudulent person really purport to be a veterinarian, or was it just an assumption on his part? So when it comes down to it, the laws are there, but the enforcement is difficult, and the proof is difficult to acquire, even where you have what looks to be blatant, obvious evidence. There's a hesitation on the part of the TTPS sometimes to investigate and pursue, and therefore, in such cases, we end up with, how do we address this? And fundamentally, it comes down to, again, trying to get this culture change and educate, so that children learning from young, when their parents say it's okay to throw the stone at the dog, chase the dog out of the yard, throw hot water at the animals, when their parents tell them this, hopefully the children push back and say, well, no, we learned in school that that's not okay. And that's our hope right now.
And definitely, of course, conversations like this are what need to continue, and I'm sure some public awareness campaigns. Also, just listening to you, again, thinking that, we still have this view of animals as objects, as property, in reference to what you would have just mentioned, for example, with the TTPS and having to deal with a certain situation. So a lot of unlearning does have to take place. But for now, we're almost out of time. So if you could kindly share some closing comments with Trinidad and Tobago, just to, sort of bolster this cause and raise awareness.
Absolutely. If owners think that they're seeing issues that rise to the point of concerning animal welfare, where you have clear evidence that something has happened, please feel free to email us, and we will see how best we can assist you at TTVA, Trinidad and Tobago Vet Association, TTVA2008 @gmail.com. Please feel free to email us, and we will assist you however best we can, because animal welfare is paramount in what we do.
It definitely is paramount. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure to have you in studio with us this morning, and seeing you here in capacity as media liaison, hoping to have you back again soon.
Thank you very much.
It's our pleasure. Dr. Paul Crooks in studio with us this morning, speaking about animal welfare and the 5 animal freedoms. Let's all educate ourselves and understand that these furry friends are our family. Stay tuned. There's more coming up after this break.
How deep is your love? How deep is your love? I really need to learn.